okay at the back? Too loud? Let me move that a little bit down. I'm shocked myself. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. So I'm Brian Clifton. I gave you a quick flash of this just before I started. That was me with hair, believe it or not. My son looks just like me. It's quite a scary picture. Very brief introduction to me. I'm obviously an Englishman. So it feels echoey. Can you hear me okay? Is that better? Yeah? So I'm an Englishman, as you can tell by my accent. Not American English, thank God. Based in Sweden, so I'm pan-European. I work for my own company. It's called Search Integration. We're based in Sweden there. Had our first winter snow yesterday. Now today I'm going to talk about data quality. I talk a lot about quality of data and how good it is and how bad it is in terms of Google Analytics. I'll talk about that today. If you're interested in that, then that happens at verifieddata.com. I did my research there. And we'll do some research today as well. I want some of your feedback, so we'll get a little bit interactive as well. And if you are interested in talking to me and listening to what I have to say and interacting with me in terms of what I think and about analytics and improving measurement and improving websites at the end of the day, I blog at brianclifton.com. So that was when I had hair. Anyway, I want to cast your mind back now 11 years, in fact almost 11 years to the day, to 2005. A really big year in terms of the web analytics industry, web measurement industry. It was the year when a small San Diego-based company called Urchin was acquired by a much bigger Californian-based company called Google Inc. So they acquired this company. Now, you just think back 11 years ago, this is what we all had in our pockets. So no smartphones then, it was all very much dumb phones. No iPhones, that was still 2 years away, 2007. We had no Facebook, no Twitter, no Google Maps, no YouTube, and incredible to think, today's use of the internet not having those tools available. LinkedIn had just launched, and Gmail was only around about a year old. That had only just launched as well. So technology-wise, we're a little bit backwards compared to today. And this was what the first version of Google Analytics looked like. It launched on the 14th of November, 2005. Now, by today's standards, this looks pretty basic, not quite as flashy or rounded edges or sort of shiny as the current product is, or many graphical products out there. But this is actually a very, very good user interface. And you probably still recognize a lot of the elements in Google Analytics today from here. The reason why it's so good is because of its data architecture. In other words, it's cramming an awful lot of information into a small space and making it intuitive to move around and navigate. And this was a big selling point for Urchin software at the time. A lot of products in those days were very much aimed at IT departments. Lots of numbers, lots of tables, not so much graphical, and not easy to really find the sort of information you were looking at. Google liked this. They liked this interface, simple interface that people can get to grips with within minutes and not have to go on a week-long training course, that type of thing. Also, the ease of installation was a big part of why Google acquired this product. Almost as simple as the user interface is. You apply a little bit of tracking code onto every single page. That sounds easy. Sometimes it can be a bit harder. But you apply your tracking code on those pages, and you get data in, and you get data that you can use almost immediately. So let's just have a quick look at the history of analytics. So we go back to 2005, and there was around about 20 players out there. Main players that had customers that were selling their products, selling their services. These are the kind of top ones you're probably familiar with. There's a lot of mergers and acquisitions, so Omniture is no longer Omniture, it's part of the Adobe suite, and so forth. Now, one of the first things we did just after the acquisitions, and that happened early 2005 prior to the launch, but one of the first things we had to do as a team was figure out, okay, we're going to launch this new product, Google Analytics. How big is the industry? How big is the industry at that point? Now, it was very much back of the envelope calculations. We had to guesstimate. We couldn't really know the real numbers. But we went out there and we looked at what tracking pixels we could find on pages. And we did an estimate that the total industry size in circa 2005 was about 30,000 accounts. That was it, 30,000 paid accounts, people prepared to pay and invest in the product. And it could be from a few $100s a month per year to the much more enterprise level, but just prepared to pay. So not the free sort of Webalizer stuff that was out there. And then Google came along, and they did something really quite revolutionary and disruptive. They broke the mold. They said, okay, we're not going to charge people for this product, we're going to give it away for free. Why would they do that? Well, the thinking was, and I had to answer these questions, what is your motive? The thinking was, and still very much is, that if people understand the website, the traffic to the website, where it's coming from, then of course you're going to want to spend more money on digital marketing, and the likely place you're going to go to is Google. So they're going to make their money elsewhere. So that launched and really was this kind of sea change in November 2005. Within the first week, the first 7 days, the industry, total industry size tripled. We'd gone from 30,000 accounts and added another 100,000 accounts to it. So this fantastic, not just a hockey stick adoption in 7 days, but a complete sort of seismic shift, a real cliff edge. That was great, and everyone's sort of patting themselves on the back that they've launched a successful product. We knew there were barriers to using analytics products. We didn't realize that free was such a big disincentive for people to use the product. Now, this was a problem for us because we'd actually anticipated 100,000 new sign-ups in the first 12 months, and we got it in the first 7 days. So nice to be successful, but it did cause us an embarrassment. We had to literally stop new sign-ups. Service carried on running for the first 100,000 users, but we had to take a pause. Very embarrassing time for me trying to explain that, why one of the world's largest technology companies can't cope with so many users. So for those of you that were around at that time, you remember the sort of invitation token system. You had to wait in a queue. It took about a year, and then we launched again, about the same time, 2006, and things took off again through the roof. Now, everything I've just talked about, that first 1 year, first 18 months period of the Google Analytics launch, is all down in that bottom left-hand corner. The sort of 30,000, and then the seismic shift, and then the growth again. Of course, since then, if we fast forward, things have ballooned. And we've gone from an industry that has 30,000 accounts to one that, certainly from Google's point of view, has 30 million accounts out there live. So active accounts, people logging in on a regular basis. Think about that, 1,000-fold increase in 10 years. Fantastic growth. I guess what I'm saying here is Google dominates. That's good, and there's bad side of that. Of course, you want competition for better innovation and pace of change. But Google's done a good job of this so far. They're innovating very fast, almost too fast. It's sometimes difficult to keep up with them. And everyone's grown. Competitors have grown as well. Their market space has grown. But Google dominates. And it's not just the mom and pop stores that may only ever use a free product, but it's the big enterprises as well. It's the Sonys of this world. It's the government departments. It's big universities. It's the Tetra Paks. It's those global companies as well. So now we've gone from, very good from a data architecture, but quite bland charts and graphs in Google Analytics, to these more sort of beautiful, Sankey diagrams where you can envisage the flow of traffic around your site. Very powerful if you set up your goals. Goal can be an obvious transaction, but even other goals like contact forms or any kind of PDF download, anything where you're engaging with your visitors. Set them up as goals and you can look at the flow around them. Do people go straight to the goals and then leave the site? Or do they move around and do other things and look at other touch points? And also, of course, we now have, which was kind of Google's real motive for getting in this space, a much better understanding of marketing, digital marketing. So understanding where the overlaps lie. It's no longer the case that people go to a website and do their business and convert and then go away. They kind of, so much competition there now. People go to a website multiple times before they're ready to commit. So there's many journeys on there. So your marketing overlaps. You will be emailing and buying ads and serving all sorts of different campaigns to the same visitor. So they overlap, and maybe they don't overlap. Maybe there's some silos as well. And if you have a real strong understanding of your marketing, then you can do the clever stuff, which has been around now for the last couple of years, a big talking point of attribution modeling. So when there's a conversion, somebody does something you want them to do on your website, e-commerce is an obvious one, being able to say, okay, for all of those different touch points, how people came to your website, how much credit do you give to them? The old sort of out-of-date method was to simply attribute everything to last click, and you could flip that around if you're a weak brand, if you're not a strong global brand, then the first click can be very, very important to you. Bringing that lead in the first touch point, because you want to hold them. If you're a stronger brand, if you're a Sony Entertainment, someone like that, then it's usually the last click because your brand is so pervasive on the internet. But ultimately, you're probably somewhere in between that. And so distributing that credit to all of the referrers that come to your website is very powerful stuff. Well, that's great. There's lots of bells and whistles there. I've only touched on a couple there. There are literally hundreds of features that have been developed over the last 10 years. Some minor, some beautiful, and some very, very powerful. But so what? You know, they're just features. Google and people like me who work with Google products are not interested really in the features. It's about what you do with the data, and that's only important if you can trust it. If you can actually trust the data, not just yourself, because you don't want to waste your time going through data that's polluted or dirty, but it's also within the whole organization, because ultimately you want people to invest in your team. You want to grow your team, and it may be more headcount, it may be more resources to buy more tools, it may be to outsource some of the work to get some external help. Whatever it is you want to grow, that requires investment. The company's got to spend money with you and your team, and to do that, they want to trust the data. This turns out to be a real problem. It's more important now because investment is happening. 10 years ago, it was a nice-to-have little tool on the side, whether it was Google Analytics or some other tool. It was kind of treated as a little sort of hobby for someone that was interested in data. Now people, the boardroom level, the CXOs, want to use this data to make decisions with. And if you're trying to use a product like Google Analytics 360, the premium product, $150,000 investment just to use the tool, that's a price every year that you have to pay. You really want to make sure as a CEO or a CXO that you have confidence that the data is good and that you can use it ultimately. So this is a question really to you guys. So this is where we're going to do a little bit of research. This is what I do at Verified Data. I go around events like this and I get people's input. I want you to go online, get your phones out, your laptops, tablets. We're going to go to this website, menti.com. Simple URL, FF4C22. Very quick survey about do you trust your data? And it's based on these 5 simple areas. So basic numbers, you know, page views, visit counts. I want you to look at that. We're going to do this live, by the way. I'm going to look at so you better be voting because we're going to see the results in a second. Also look at marketing performance, engagement, conversion data, that sort of thing, and so on. We're going to move this slider bar. You can rate your trust, and it's a gut feeling trust, but you're going to rate your trust from 1 to 10, 1 being you don't really trust the data at all. It's like, what are we going to do with this? It's wasting your time. To 10 where you have complete trust. In other words, you will stand up in front of your boss or in front of the boardroom and say, hey, I put my job on the line because I think this data is correct and I want to do X with it. Let's have a flick over. Let's see you guys voting. Good stuff. Okay, so this is live now. How many have we got in the room? We must have more than 100 people there, so let's get those numbers up. We've got 34 coming through. So anyway, 1 to 10. Everyone got online okay? So this is, please keep doing that. It's a good feedback. And at after today, these slides will be available for you to download. I will make sure that I incorporate these results in the slides so you actually get to see this data. But it's part of a bigger study, a much bigger study, where we're trying to understand trust. Does it vary by region? Do people trust the data more in the US? Not sure after the election results, but are people more savvy in the US or Canada or wherever it is? Is Europe different to Asia? Trying to get a feel for trust levels and whether they vary between these 5 different segments. This looks pretty similar to what I've seen everywhere else, and that's kind of where it's tending to be. For the basic numbers, the page views, the number of visits, that type of thing, maybe bounce rates and time on site if you're looking at that kind of information. It's a higher trust level, and this is what, coming in at just under 8, yeah, that's pretty standard to what I see. You can see the distribution, it's kind of faded out of the back there, but you can see the distributions. Maybe I can mouse over that. Yeah, you can see the distribution there's quite broad. Should mouse over these. All of the distribution is very broad. But this is quite common, that the top one, the basic numbers, is higher than the others. Now, there's some interesting stuff there that I don't have the answers at yet, just on, that I'm still looking at, but questions as to, okay, it's maybe expected that the basic stuff, because it's so easy to collect, are higher than the others, but why is it only 8 out of 10? If it's so simple to collect and it's just slapping a piece of code on your pages, why don't people trust it completely? Why don't they put their jobs on the line and say, yeah, we had, 100,000 visits to our site yesterday, last week, last month, whatever it is. And similarly for the other stuff, I mean, you could argue that, we're getting more complexity in the website and visitor behavior, and therefore the setting and the tracking of it, so it gets harder. So I can understand there's more of a disconnect there with the trust. And the theory really that I have is the problem with data and the lack of trust in it is really due to the fact that the people that use the data, you guys, the marketers, the analysts, are disconnected from the implementation. You're not involved in the implementation, and you're not guiding people how to do this. The business is disconnected from the marketing. And so because of that, because you don't know where the data comes from or how it's collected or what the implications of doing it in a certain way, because there's usually more than one way of doing the same thing, there's this disconnect, and there's a kind of smell test. It's like, it doesn't smell right, it doesn't seem right. We launched a campaign and it didn't perform the way we thought it was going to do. It doesn't match the numbers, or it doesn't match our telephone center, or our back-end e-commerce system gives us one number that's different to the number in Google Analytics. Okay. So thank you for that. We've got 100 there. Keep going if you haven't voted, please. As I say, this is part of a wider piece of research that will be freely available later, but certainly it will go into the slides from today. Okay. It's not a slide. So what's the cost of all this at the end of the day? What's the cost of not being able to trust your data? This is 2 segments. It's obviously a Google Analytics screenshot. It's real data, and it's 2 segments. The blue line is all traffic, so everything that comes to your website, basically. And the orange line there is what we call attentive visitors, so people who are paying attention. You could say engagement also. Engagement usually means something a bit stronger, but I'm defining this, it's just paying attention. In other words, these aren't people who just come to your website and look at one page and go, or people who randomly look around and have no real interaction. These are people that are obviously doing any kind of goal that you've defined on your site. Download a PDF may be very important to you. Obviously, any kind of collection of personal information, filling in forms, people picking up the phone, clicking on a Call Me Now button. But also the more sort of softer metrics, like if you know what your average time on site is, roughly, what about those visitors that stay 50% more than average, or 100% more, double, that sort of thing? What about people that look at twice as many page views as the average? So you could argue that these people that use search, for example, use search and then refine the search on your website. These sort of people are engaging. They may not be having a great experience, but they're attentive. They're paying attention. They're trying to get to the content on your website. They're trying to answer questions. That's the orange line. So these attentive visitors, these are the ones you want. I mean, at the end of the day, you're paying for all traffic. Even if it's organic, you're still paying in some shape or form. You need help to do that. You need to spend time optimizing your website. So these are the ones you want to optimize for. You want to do your testing on, that sort of thing. You want to improve your marketing. And at the end of the day, you want to convert to customers. Now, it may not happen on that session. It may take several sessions for that conversion to happen. But you want to build that relationship with people who give a shit, basically, is what I'm saying. And the blue ones, these are the people you don't really want. This is the waste. And maybe I'll qualify that. Maybe you do want them. Maybe you just have some poorly set up campaigns, some out-of-date campaigns, something like that. So you might want to do some investigation on that and adjust campaigns and how you bring traffic to your site. Or you may just simply cull those campaigns. They're out of date, they're wrong, or something like that. Now, I'm in a privileged position of looking at a lot of data across many accounts, many verticals. And what I see is when I apply this segment, it's very easy to define. When I apply this segment across sites, I get very, very similar charts. It's around about 50%. 50% attentive visitors. People give a shit. The other 50%, I'm not too sure about those. But it reminds me of this guy. Now, this guy's John Wanamaker, and he has a quote. It's about 150 years old now, often quoted in marketing or by senior managers in marketing and advertising, that they know where half of their advertising spend is going, but they just don't know which half. I just find it amazing that this is so old and obviously a very different world to what we live in today, but it still seems to be applicable in the world of digital when we have so much data to hand. So that's the cost. It could be as much as half of your marketing spend going down the toilet because you don't have trust in the data, because you can't set up these two segments, because you simply don't have the setup to do it. So why is this so difficult? We talk about so much data out there, and Google Analytics at the end of the day is relatively straightforward to set up. Why are things so difficult? Why is it difficult to have trust in the data? Well, there's a couple of reasons, several reasons, but these are the two main ones. It's difficult. One of the reasons why it's difficult is because it's actually hard to identify bad data. It doesn't come with a flag that says, hey, I'm poor quality data, please filter me out. So you look at this analogy of water. Which one would you drink? Which one's clean? Yeah, I drink plenty of stuff that looks like the brown, murky glass on the left, trying to be healthy and get some vitamins down my neck. And there's plenty of, nasty, poisonous stuff out there as well that looks like clear water, but isn't. So my point is, it's not easy to identify which is clean and which is dirty. It does require some kind of painstaking, almost forensic analysis. And the other thing is, even if you could identify it, or even once you identify it, it's actually difficult to separate it out historically. Moving forward, it's quite straightforward. You fix the problems, basically, and you have clean water going through the tap from then on in the future. But looking backwards, it's actually very hard to do this. It's very hard to clean. In fact, I would say impossible. It can be done, but the expense of doing it, either to you or to a company like Google, is extremely costly. So it just doesn't happen. And the reason for that is because pretty much all data in Google Analytics is handled at the aggregate level. There is some individual users, but most of the reports are at aggregate level. And that means if you think about visitors or users as water molecules, you can't just go into a glass of polluted water and pick out individual dirty water molecules. You just can't do that. It's too hard to do. And why aggregate? Why not individuals? Surely we have enough processing power to do that. We're also used to clicking around Google Analytics and having reports generated in literally 1 or 2 seconds. People get very frustrated if it's much more than that. It's like, what's going on? Why am I waiting for the timer? No one likes waiting, just like web pages, no one likes waiting more than 3 seconds, 4 seconds, something like that tops. By aggregating the data, that's how Google can achieve reports that fast. In the bad old days, and still very much for some of the competitors' products, who do have individuals collected that level of granularity, it's kind of good, but you might have to sit there and wait 30 minutes for that report to be generated. You have to order it and request it for it to be delivered. And if you made a mistake, you made a typo, or you're experimenting with segments and you didn't pick the right one, you need to try again, you wait another 30 minutes. Just not really the way people want to go in this day and age. So aggregation is good for performance. It's also good from a privacy point of view. Not quite the same in other parts of the world like America, but in Europe we're very privacy sensitive. We don't like to be tracked as individuals. Fine to walk into a store and have someone counting how many's walking through the door, and do they turn left and grab the milk, or do they turn right and grab the bread? Fine to track people like that. That's my analogy for analytics. But people don't want to be tapped on the shoulder as they're walking out of the store and asked for their name and address, or they don't want to be followed home, or people taking down the license plate number. People don't like to be tracked as individuals, but they're generally happy to share everything anonymously and in aggregate. And of course, if people stop, you think post-Snowden, not really anything's happened since that, but it was a shift in terms of privacy. If people really become sensitive to this and just simply block cookies by default, for example, and other tracking methods, all of this falls down. So privacy is very important, and that's maintained. But that's why we use aggregate a lot. And so there are obstacles, is what I'm saying. There are obstacles to this. And very few businesses have any kind of process to check that analytics, the quality is good, or even monitors that continually. In fact, I'm going to stick my neck out a bit here because I can honestly say in the sort of 10 years that I've been doing this type of thing, monitoring people's data quality, I haven't come across any company that has any kind of process in place. Yes, the initial setup, of course, everyone's on top of the quality, if you like, make sure everything's tracking. But after that, it's usually a set and forget. So how do we fix this? So this is the meat of what I want to talk about the rest of the presentation. This is what I do. This is my day job, actually, auditing data. I look at data quality. I go through Google Analytics accounts. And I build tables like this. This is a summary table. It's part of typically a 15, 20-page report where each one of these items is gone through in detail. So here, and by the way, as I don't know if David's mentioned, I know he tweeted something, there is a large number of my books available here to every attendee. I go through this process in my book in detail. So you can do this. It's a manual process. You sit there and go through your data. But you can do it yourself. So I break down analytics tracking into 15 areas. These are areas related to your business, not features. So 15 different areas. Some of them may be applicable to you, some of them not. So the dashes there are for error page tracking and event tracking in this case. In this particular example, they're not important, so we're crossing those off the list. But everything else we're looking at in detail. So we start off with account setup and governance. And it's about the Google Analytics tracking code deployment, making sure every single page on your website is tracked. Because if you leave holes, that's going to cause problems. People will disappear and not be tracked. Or in even worse case is they come back. They go into a hole of being not tracked and then come back and they are tracked. That can restart a session and you can lose the attribution. So that's about coverage and then AdWords and Search Console linking and so forth. So all of these items, what we do is we go through them with the business. And this is important because some of these items are more important to your business than others. So we weight them. Each one of these items is weighted. Usually the top one, setup and governance, is kind of set in stone because that's obviously super important. But for some people, transaction tracking isn't so important. It's just a small part of their website. Perhaps you can pay for a subscription, a small subscription, but it's not your main business. For most people, if you have transaction tracking, it's the whole purpose of having a website. So that becomes super important. So there's a higher weighting for that. And everything else is possibly, somewhere in between. If you invest an awful lot of money in PDF production, file production, and that's an important part of people taking your brand, if you like, and having it available offline, that would have a higher weighting. So we weight these to the business, and then we color code them, red, yellow, green. Red meaning missing data or bad data, something wrong, or maybe not even collecting it. Green, obviously, everything seems to be working fine, no problem. And yellow, somewhere in between. And each one of these gets a score. So 0, 5, or 10. And what we do is we multiply the scores by the weighting. I haven't shown the weights here. But we multiply the score by the weighting, and then we sum all of these up, and everything's divided by 100, so it's normalized. In other words, there's a score out of 100. So this is a data quality score index out of 100. So in this particular example, just under 36%. Not very good. The rule of thumb that I have in my consultancy is we just don't touch people's data. We don't do any kind of analysis or waste any time looking at or building dashboards or anything like that until the score is over 50. That's kind of my minimum threshold. But clearly you want to get as high as you can. The better quality data you have, the more reliant on the numbers you can be and the more deeper analysis you can go. So let's just take this a little bit forward. Let's take another example. So this is another client alongside. Let's say they've just done the basics very well, but nothing else. They've done the first one there, they've done an account setup, they've just started, so there's no real complexities there, that's fine. And they've put the tracking code on every single page of the site. Fantastic. 2 basic things that you have to do, done well, but no consideration to the rest of the stuff. At the end of the day, the rest of the stuff is important. This is the meat and potato of analysis. If you only do the first 2, you're a hit counter. No need an analytics team there, no need to pay for anything really, no need to invest in products or tools or even staff. You've just done page views. And that's why the score is only 15 15%, so a low score. Take it one step further now. So now the client has perhaps come to us with a little bit more thought and a little bit more data in place. They've looked at, they've linked together Search Console, and they've added their AdWords account, so they have that data coming in with Google Analytics. And what else? Site search. They're tracking internal site search, usually because that's quite easy to do. But that's all they've done. Still, and if we're lucky, this is what we get. A score of 30%. Still not good enough really to do any kind of analysis. You have to go deeper than this. Now let's widen this right out. So now we're looking at 100 or so clients, something like that. This is a snapshot of them. All color-coded now, so we're visualizing data quality. Each one of these columns is a client. So columns going left to right there, and each one of those rows is one of those 15 items, or audit areas. This is the state of Google Analytics setups, all audited in great detail. And you can see the average score, the headline number there is just under 36%. So you think of best practice implementation, 100%, no one's really going to get there. Websites are moving too rapidly, but you certainly want to be high 80s, 90s. But the average score is 36%. And when you visualize this, you can see there's lots of red, a little bit of green, and a little bit of yellow, but lots of red. It's not a good picture. And the white, incidentally, are those things where it's not applicable. So I want to highlight just some key things that we found from this. As I say, it's part of a wider study. But here's the first thing, account setup and governance. Kind of the basics, the fundamentals. Only just under 30%, 29% do this correctly. Just the fundamental basics of setting up accounts, setting up properties, setting up views. Only 30% do that correctly. And in fact, the big shock here actually is the fact that 1 in 5 websites are tracking PII. In other words, personally identifiable information is going into Google Analytics. Now that's a big no-no for all sorts of reasons. Legally, you're in hot water if you're passing around personally identifiable information in the URLs of your website. I mean, that's a privacy problem that you have, and not only could you be in trouble with the law in your country, but if anyone finds out about this, if you have some smart person who's sharp-eyed and looks at the URLs as they're browsing around your website, if they start seeing their personal information in there, you could have a huge PR problem. That's just sensitive to anybody. But if you're a bank or financial services or anything to do with healthcare, people get very, very worried about that. The other thing we find in governance is just the volume of people that have access to the data. And once they're given access, kind of forgotten about. So I come across clients who have literally hundreds of people, kind of almost everybody has access to their data. And these aren't necessarily internal people. A lot of third-party agencies, maybe they've come and gone, years ago, no longer doing business, who probably work with some of your competitors, still have access to the data. Ex-employees, people have probably gone to work for one of your competitors, still have access to the data. And also the problem with what level of access do they have? So not just view access, but also quite often edit access and admin access. In other words, the ability to add other users as they want, and to play around with the settings, maybe accidentally or maybe intentionally, but to really screw things up. Let's fast forward then. So tracking deployment. I'm not going through all of these, but just some highlights. Tracking deployment. So this is the coverage I was talking about. Making sure every single page has the same tracking code and that same tracking code fires all the time. You would have thought that was pretty straightforward. Drop it into the template of your CMS system. Half of websites get that wrong. And I should say that these clients that I'm looking at here are clients that are investing in analytics. These aren't mom and pop stores who are just doing it themselves, figuring it out. These are people that come to my business, basically my consulting, and spend money on analytics. So they are investing in this area. So you would have thought the implementation, the basic stuff will be done well. Half of them get it wrong. And that's usually things like missing page tags, so missing tracking code, or duplicate, triplicate tags on a page. And the inconsistency of that as well. If it's consistent, it's usually quite easy to fix, but sometimes you go into different parts of a website and there may be 3 triplicates of the same tag. That's a problem because you will count the same visitor 3 times and 3 page views and so on. So it could be missing, or it could be multiple tags, or it could just be tags that just don't fire. the trigger's just not working correctly or not doing what it's intended to do. Form submission tracking. So if you're not an e-commerce site, this is kind of everything that you really want to do on your website. You want to collect personal information from people because not to go in Google Analytics, of course, but to go into your back-end system so that you can contact those people and build a relationship. Only 21% get that right. And it's typically because when the form is submitted, there's no difference between the URL of the submitted form versus the URL of the viewable form. In other words, there's no way you can tell how many people are converting, how many people view the form and complete it. You can do that with event tracking as well, but the point is, with form submission tracking here, none of those things are happening for 79% of the time. Just kind of forgotten about or assume that it's tracked by default. Transaction tracking, again, you would have thought, this is complicated. Without a doubt, transaction tracking is probably the most difficult part to get right in Google Analytics, particularly now if you're using enhanced e-commerce. It's not, a simple 5-minute job. It does take some thought. So it's hard to get this right. So I can understand this is lower, but you would have thought that when you're engaging with transaction tracking, because you have to do modifications to your site, you have to get those variables into your data layer. So you need to talk to someone in web development or IT. You would have thought by bringing those people in, you'd have a stronger chance of getting it right because they're supposed to be smarter, switched on people. Only 26% do that right. So people are trying to, base their revenue numbers. They're trying to look at the value of pages or sections on the website, looking at the values of visitors and the value of their marketing based on numbers that are just wrong. Visitor segmentation. This is the bread and butter of any analytics, as I'm sure you know. If you don't get the visitor segmentation right, what are you analyzing exactly? It's just an average of averages. So this is important to get right. And the emphasis here is on visitor segmentation. Session-based segmentation, so looking at individual sessions and where people came from and their browser settings or whether they use a mobile device, very easy to do, very straightforward to do in Google Analytics and kind of by default. But at the visitor level, in other words, if I come to your website and I convert, then I'm a customer. But if I come to your website another 3 or 4 times and don't purchase anything, don't convert in any shape or form, I'm just browsing around for information, doing some research for my next purchase. If you haven't identified me from the first time I became a customer, then on those subsequent sessions, I'm just a regular visitor, returning visitor if you're lucky, if I'm using the same device. But I'm not a customer. And so understanding customers versus non-customers versus subscribers, incredibly important to do that when you get down to any kind of analysis beyond sort of page view and visit accounts. And the last one there, campaign tracking, something that Google has invested an awful lot of money in to try and get right, because if you get it right, you're probably going to spend more money with Google. That's always been the theory. That's always been the kind of business model, certainly business model for free. Only 25% get that right. And it's not that it's difficult. It's very straightforward to do, as you guys will be aware. You're only talking about setting up 5 campaign variables on your landing pages. That's all you have to do. But there seems to be a process where that doesn't happen consistently. So at a very basic level, you can have people defining campaigns that are called email, for example. But how do they write that? Do they write that with a capital E, or is it all lowercase? Is it E-mail? Is it E-post? Is it some other language variant? Often you see those happening all the time, and all that does is split and fragment your data. So it's more about a process of having the entire organization consistently tracking in the same way, rather than not being done at all. So it does get done, it's just not done very well. Okay. That's the state of analytics. Not particularly great. Good if you're a consultant, I guess, and you're trying to fix these things. There's plenty of things to fix. But 11 years on, 11 years after Google Analytics launched, and we're probably 20 years into the industry of analytics, huge adoption and lots of events like this, I was surprised that things are like this, as bad as this. I kind of knew anecdotally there were problems. That's kind of, why my business exists. But seeing this written down and visualized in this way really was an eye-opener for me. So as I say, it's part of a bigger piece of research. So I want to leave you, last sort of 5 minutes here is just 5 takeaways really of what you can do to improve your data quality. I'll list them out now, but let's go through these. I think one of the most important ones That's why I listed as number one. They're not really in any particular order, but I would say this is the important one. Is you must take ownership of your data, of your data quality, sorry. And from the top down. So I mean by getting it in someone's responsibility, on someone's plate at board level. So they're obviously not going to do auditing in the same way that I would do. They're not interested in the detail, but they certainly want to make decisions on this data, so they are interested in the quality. So if it's on at a board level, a CXO level, and it's on their plate to make sure that data quality is always on top before any numbers are shared to the organization, you will find that investment coming through all the way through. Typically, responsibility of data quality is usually with somebody quite junior in the organization. And they can be super smart, very smart, it could be PhD level. But the junior, I mean in that they can't make the decisions of investing in sorting this out. So it has to come from the top down. Next one is avoid training board level people, because you want their interest, you want to share the love, you want to tell the stories and the insights that you get from the data. So build the solid foundations and then do the stories based on that. So you want to involve these people. And it's a tricky thing to pull off, because these guys are usually very analytical. That's why they're in that job. They're analytical in a different way. They're usually finance analysts or something like that, but they have to evaluate risk every single day and plan for the future. So they're analytical thinkers, but they're not web analytics specialists. So they have an interest, if you spark that interest, they may have an interest to look at the reports, but avoid training them. They don't understand the nitty-gritty detail of using the product and how it's set up, and that's really the danger. It's very easy to look at the wrong data, either the wrong report, the wrong profile, or simply use or even forget the wrong segment that needs to be applied before you do anything with it. Touched on it a second ago, master campaign tracking. Really get on top of that. As you know, it's not rocket science. It's quite simple to define your 5 variables, but it's a process, and having a centralized process that the whole organization can work with. So typically what I see the problems here is the customer retention team, the people that are responsible for existing customers and growing and developing them, they do their own tracking somewhere for what they do. People responsible for email marketing is perhaps sat in another department. PR, communications teams tend to work in another part of the company. And then the web marketers, separate again. And usually what happens is, although they're aware of campaign tracking, they're not all talking to each other. And so you end up with this kind of mishmash of data coming through when no one can really identify how a campaign's performing. Because you don't just want to see one individual campaign, you want to roll that up, typically across different channels. So show me campaign X, how did that perform across the different channels? Or show me the channels and show me which campaigns work best. You can only do that with a consistent process in place. You get on top of that, and you'll be able to do the much more interesting stuff of attribution modeling. Where are we? Number 4. Again, I touched on this before about governance. Really lock down your setup, minimize your risk, minimize the chance that something's going to go wrong, and also minimize the chance that data is going to be shared in places where it shouldn't be. So if you get legal involved at all, I don't recommend you do that, but if you get legal involved with your analytics setup, they will be shocked, I guarantee you, if they saw the number of people that have access to very sensitive company information. Of course, if you're e-commerce, you've got your revenue data in there, money is coming in there, how much money you're making. But even if you're not e-commerce, you've got all of your marketing numbers there, your marketing spend. Pretty much your digital strategy can be figured out from there. That's very valuable information to anybody in or out of the organization, but you really don't want ex-employees or ex-agencies in there. Lock that down. Lock down access as well. A very common mistake I see, not these individuals, but I do see these generic email addresses being used. Gmail's an obvious one, Hotmail, those sort of things. Just avoid that. You have no control over those accounts. You can't point to anyone really and say, oh, Brian Clifton, is this your Gmail account? Well, no, it isn't, but you may think it is, but no, it isn't. You have no control over that. Make sure you use organizational addresses so that you can point to someone and say, hey, Mr. Website, domain name, why does this particular person in your organization have access to my data? You can do that. You can pick up the phone and complain to someone. You'll know instantly who they are. who the organization is and what they're a part of. You can't do that with generic addresses like that. And then lastly, I guess, kind of like I say, is the job that I do. Audit and verify your data and do it regularly. It's not a sexy job, I must admit, and it's quite painful. I alluded to that earlier about how difficult it is to find dirty data. When I go through the process that I describe in the book, it takes me about 3 days to do an audit, to go through it. You only saw the summary page there, the kind of traffic light scoring system. A lot of detail because people want to know, why is it red? Why is it yellow? And so you have to go through the detail, then you have to cross-reference that and make sure it's not just one page that's flagging up an error, but it's actually a system-wide issue. So you do have to do this, and complicated sites can take, more than 3 days. So it's quite a painful process, and no one really wants to do that. And it's not a job you can hand off to a junior either. You really need to know your analytics set up very well to be able to do this. So what I often see is month-on-month comparisons is not really there. It's not really where you want to be. Just because of seasonal fluctuations, you often want to compare year on year. How do we compare now with last year? And you can see that real data here, blue versus orange. There's a big uplift there. That's fantastic. Do we give everyone a bonus? You need to check that. Is that difference real? So this is a client, for example, where we've gone through this auditing process on a quarter-by-quarter basis. So 5 different audits there going over. And you can see the quality score, quality index, going up from a poor 14%, gradually getting better. It's not a simple fix, some of these things. So they got to a very nice high 93%. So good quality data coming through. But it took time to do that. It took a year to do that. And clearly, if you were trying to compare year on year, looking at the current quarter with last quarter, it's just not valid to do that. You may be able to isolate specific data points where they are good in Q1 last year versus good Q1 this year. That's going to be quite difficult to do and difficult to rely on. And that was my last slide. So thank you for that. I would just say that I am available. I do have to shoot off, unfortunately, at lunchtime, but I am available after lunch. There are a bunch of books somewhere here. I've said I'd be happy to sign them. So if you want to have a look at this book, please do pick up a copy. Thank you.